How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, good, Perrin. Good to see you. As you well know, I really admire what you do on the drum kit, and also you work as a producer and general all-round good human. So I just wanted to ask you, do you have a memory of when you were young, in your childhood, when you first actually noticed drums or heard a drummer, or
Yeah, I early on, my parents used to go to a lot of gigs around town in Katoomba, Blue Mountains, New South Wales, and a couple of times, some of my earliest memories of watching drummers was actually watching you, Ben and Bobby, in Circle of Rhythm. My mum used to take me to a bunch of those gigs, and I think that coincided with I don't know if you know Peter Kennard.
Yeah, no, Peter well.
Yeah. Peter Kennard was also someone that was teaching my mum djembe at the time, doing some local djembe classes, and she used to go to these kind of, I don't know, these parties that were thrown on by this guy called Rain. The Mountains. I don't know if you know him, but
no, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, Rain is a great name. He used to do these gatherings, and he'd have like a lot of musicians, and a lot of them happened to be into the West African rhythms, and we had like a Pizzo coming along to a couple of them, who was like a West African master djembe player, and he came to a bunch of them as well. So there was just like a lot of people that were, I guess at the time, in their mid to late 30s, and I was about like 12 to 14 years old, kind of going into these classes, and not classes so much, they were just kind of gatherings, and there would be lots of jams, and I'd just pick up whatever was in front of me and try to join in. And I got some good advice when I was really young from Peter, when he said to me that instead of playing all the time, just try and listen to what everyone else is doing, and also watch the dancers' feet, and that'll give you the inspiration to play. And that stuck with me a lot, because I used to overplay even at like a young age. I didn't even know what I was doing,
Yeah.
So that was cool.
That's great advice from Peter. It's funny, when I was 11, I was playing at old time dances with my mum, who used to play piano, and I remember saying, "Mum, how do I keep time?" Because I hadn't really thought about it, and I was doing okay, I'm sure. And she said, "It's easy, just watch the dancers' feet."
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of a trick answer, really, because obviously the dancers are listening to the drummer. But it is great advice. And if you look at a big crowd dancing, the right in the middle of their pulse is like just totally where the groove is at, which is fantastic.
Absolutely, it is.
And at that stage, you probably caught the bug a bit, I say. Did you ever, at that early age, did you think that you may like to be a musician, make a living out of playing music?
No, at that point it was just it was an obsession. I really loved the way it made me feel, and I would often enjoy going to those like adult parties, playing or listening, then going to like parties of kids my own age. I would like often enjoy going to them more, and New Year's Eve parties and stuff, I'd go with my parents, because they'd often have good music and jams and stuff happening. So I would always just love to surround myself with that energy. I definitely was more into sport at this point. It was just kind of like something that entered in my life, and I really, really loved it. And from age, just having music around the house, and then not realizing how much it's influencing me until like, around 17 years old, I started really loving music. I got into like making beats on an MPC, and doing electronic music. And at that point, I wasn't really thinking about drums anymore. I was just thinking about how to make a lot of hip hop stuff. I was really inspired by hip hop music at the time. My brother showed me stuff, and then from there, I just kept going in,
Yeah.
and just more. So yeah, around that age, I was like, I would love to do this for the rest of my life. I just had that vision of traveling the world and collaborating with artists from all around the world to make a fusion of electronic music and like organic music and with organic tones. And that was like a love of mine for a long time, but I didn't really know how to do it. So kind of embarked on that. Yeah.
Sorry, was Jay Dilla one of your big influences?
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely, yeah. Because he kind of he had actually produced a lot of the songs that I really loved, even when it wasn't like his own solo project. It was just all of my favorite songs. I realized after, because I didn't really, I just liked what I liked. I didn't necessarily geek out and try and find out who did what. I just liked this song, like that song, and then at one point it all clicked that I was like, every song I loved was actually produced by Dilla or Madlib or Q-Tip. They were my three favorite producers at the time. But a lot of stuff was Jay Dilla, me not knowing that he produced it. Just the feel that he had putting sounds together, and especially the pulse and the rhythm, so like simple but not straight ahead, not quantized, like it has a natural feel for electronic music. And I really, really enjoyed that, but didn't really know the technicality of how it was done. Just knew it felt right when I heard it. And then I definitely embarked on a journey to try and tonally get the same tones that Dilla was getting. But at this point, I didn't know how he was even getting those tones. I just assumed that he played everything.
Okay.
Yeah,
so he probably sampled a lot of stuff, didn't he?
He did. He sampled, and I guess my perception on what sampling was at the time was so different to what actually, like the way it started and the way it progressed, and especially with American music. I think the people that showed me how to sample and use like drum machines and stuff were sampling in a different context, more like sampling music that is like $1 from a Vinnie's bin and trying to make the best out of a crappy, or what you perceive to be a crappy record. Whereas like in a lot of American music, it's like more of a homage to the artist that they're sampling, or something that they grew up on, or like that is rare, and they've gone and like purchased the record and then made a little edit of their favorite part of the song and kind of repeated that. And that's essentially what a lot of them were doing. But for me, I was like, oh wow, like the Rhodes part's so good, the drum sounds are amazing. Wonder how he got those drum sounds, or whereas it's like actually the engineer in the studio from the record, from back when it was recorded, that had the sounds, so like me trying to embark on that journey is basically like leads me to where I am now, where I've got all this gear and I'm trying to like recreate samples really.
And so was there a very conscious transfer to you actually then getting on a kit and playing live and then eventually producing? But when did you get into the kit?
I got into the kit like when I moved to Melbourne, really, like solidly. I dabbled with it in the mountains, just had like little 3-pieces kits. And also in Sydney, I used to, I guess the initial starting point for me to jump on a kit was actually busking in Sydney, and sometimes in the mountains, but just to make some extra cash. And I used to have a cajon that I sat on, and a hi-hat and a snare, and that was it. And so I didn't use my feet. I just had an open hand, like my right hand, my strongest hand on the bass drum, which was the cajon at the time.
Yeah. And
my left hand doing the snare and the hi-hat, and sometimes my left foot, but my feet were very, very bad. Yeah, that was the initial start point for drums. And then when I moved to Melbourne, with the band that I was in at the time, I wasn't drumming in that band, but we moved down without a drummer. So I started drumming on our rehearsals to try and kind of keep the momentum of the rehearsals happening, and that was like another starting point for me to I just realized that I could actually kind of do what was in my head. I was like, and that was interesting to me because I never thought of it, on a drum kit. So it was like simple at the time. It was easy for me to play, but for other people it sounded very complex because of the jiltedness of it. But that was a very natural way for me to go. It felt very natural for me to play like that. It's actually more unnatural for me to play like tight and quantized, which is what I've been striving for a long time. Try and be able to do that, but also just let myself go and be free and not be bound by any like quantized, any perfection really. Just try and let myself go. So it's always it's always been that constant ebb and flow between practicing and getting tight and then letting myself go, and it's like bouncing between those two.
Like when I first started hearing about you from really good musicians, the story it was very interesting, and I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, there's an element of truth to it. They said, "Oh, Greg, you've got to see. Have you seen Perrin yet?" And I said, "No." I said, "Oh, apparently he started out as a DJ, and he got really influenced by all the beats that were made, and then transferred that onto drums." So that was the story that was going around, and even Jeff Lang told me that story. Great guitar player. So do you think that sort of makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. Like my approach to drums is definitely from electronic side. Yeah, I like when I first started, it was actually easier for me to learn beats, or not necessarily easier. I feel like now I'm learning more complicated beats, but at the time it was easy for me to learn a lot of, especially anything that has a 4/4 feel, to learn it, because I would just see it as a grid. I would just see it as if like I was making it on an MPC, which is not a grid, but at this point I was like going between MPC and computer. So I started doing a lot more chopping up within the DAW, just with the mouse and chopping up samples. And I mean, there was a period where I wasn't drumming for Hiatus, but I would really love the drums at this time. And there was a transition period where I made this concept album where I just used one sample and tried to play everything else around this one sample. And the one sample would be a repeating thing that would happen from start of the song to the end of the song. I would just try and find a common pulse that made it feel like a hip hop song, basically, but without manipulating the original sample at all, just using that swing and seeing how many different ways you can play a groove underneath exactly the same feel. So that was like a good concept. And I also told myself that no drummer would be able to play like exactly on, so I started moving the files left and right, try and give it a bit more natural feel. And then at the end of it doesn't sound natural at all, but I was learning those breaks. They were the first ones I tried to learn on the drums.
Did you release that concept album?
No, I didn't. It's actually sitting on my computer. I've released some tracks off it on different mixtapes early on, but I would like to get it out there with a bit of backstory. It's cool. Like I listened to it recently, and still some really good ideas on there that I would never be able to do again because of the just of how I was thinking about music at the time and being pretty naive to a lot of the stuff. So I feel like the more I know, the harder it is to get to that point. But yeah, it was really, so I definitely like approached the drums trying to emulate electric sounds. And
which is when I heard about that, and then eventually when I saw you, I thought, isn't that an amazing modern or contemporary concept that we produce things, and then you've got machines happening, and then nowadays a human like yourself is influenced by machines in a sense, So
yeah, the new world, man.
Oh, geez. Now, was there a time then when you realised you really wanted to really get really good on the kit? Was there a sort of a woodshedding time in your life where you sat down and just practiced for 6 hours a day or whatever?
Yeah, definitely, man. I think like when the band originally, when I moved to Melbourne, was a 10-piece band, but only 9 of us came down, as I was saying before. I came down without the drummer, so I started drumming. for rehearsals, and that band eventually split. A lot of heat motivated, and we're all living in the one house, you know, naturally. Early 20s, this is what happens. And then yeah, just like at that point when the band split, I don't know, I just really wanted to go further on my production. And that concept album I was talking about, me chopping the drums and trying to imagine if a drummer was playing along with this stuff. At that point, I just started embarking on the journey of like, I want to get rid of programmed drums basically, and I want to start recording my own drums, because I could never quite get the feeling right when I was producing it. I could never get the feel of like being out, but also being like musical on the drums, and being just as part as the melody as the bass or keys or guitar, you know, kind of trying to see the drums like that. So yeah, around 22 years old, that's like the memory that I have, is when I really like put my head down, and I did it for about 2 years. I just played as much as I could, just so inspired. Every day I got to the kit, I learned something new. So like I would just always keep learning something new. And like, I can't do this, I'll just practice it all day until I could do it. Yeah.
Were you listening to other drummers at that stage? You know, like any of the great American drummers?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I would say in the very beginning, it was like friends from that were even living in the house. I had a bunch of really great living in there. So that was like, you know, blessing for sure. Like the house that I happened to move into had two amazing drummers in there. And Simon Maven was also living there. Who's in Hiatus. And I didn't really even talk to him at this point. There was about 6 people living in the house, and he was always on tour. So it was that kind of high caliber musician house. And I was like, you know, some guy that made beats, and then stumbled across in this house. And so I really lapped up all the influence and inspiration around me, and asked a lot of questions, and just shedded. But I was, I think at that time, probably obsessed, or about to be obsessed with Chris Dave for sure. Like Chris Dave blew my mind apart. It's just like, oh my God, like this is what you can do. And it was also kind of like that thing, you know, you have an idea and then someone else does something that totally inspires you, but it's also in a very similar trajectory.
Definitely, yeah.
Like that was a shock. I remember talking to a friend of mine, Lee Fisher, who's also a really amazing drummer from Melbourne, and he just was like, have you heard this guy before? And I was like, no. And we'd just been talking about like trying to get drum sounds that sound, you know, not like your regular drum kit, you know. And he's like, oh, check out this guy, like these sounds are pretty cool. And then I was just like, what? Got obsessed with him and the way he plays, and it's very electronically influenced too. And I've had,
I was going to say he's like the American Perrin Moss.
It's funny, and like everything's, it's interesting because you get like so many similarities, and then you get like pigeonholed. You know, I felt like I pigeonholed myself, and also got pigeonholed by other people because of the technique and the influence and stuff. So me personally, it's always trying to like reinvent myself all the time.
Good. Yeah.
And it does, you know, there's only so many times I think you can reinvent yourself. And like, especially if you stop researching or stop listening to other music and get caught in the way you think. And I don't know, I always like to mix it up. I think like since the early days, like after Choose Your Weapon, I feel like from then on, I had been trying to do the opposite of what I'm naturally good at.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Playing loose and playing like a bit like all that stuff. And I tried to tighten everything up and, you know, focus on rudiments and try to get my playing better so I could like, because I wanted to be loose, but I also wanted to be very tight at specific moments. And I know that's really hard, you know. And at that point, when talking about being very, very tight at specific moments, I think a lot of that inspiration was coming from like Hindustani music, and because of the mastery of their instrument, actually do that. It sounds like water, like so much focus and dedication to the instrument and practice that when it comes to performing, you get taken away and swept away to another world, because there's no one focusing on the technical side of it at all, because that's already been shedded so much that it just comes out and you're just breathing, and it sounds beautiful. So took a lot of inspiration from culturally from that side of the world. And yeah, and I've I mix it up all the time. I feel like I haven't gone down that path for a while, but I think that's where we align as well, because like when I hear you play, you have so much influence from that part of the world too, and you've able to like make it comprehensible for everyone else who doesn't understand that culture, or understand how to read that rhythm, those rhythms. And I certainly don't, but I can hear it and try to understand more. But yeah, you have definitely gone down that path. In that, how long do you reckon it's been since you've been doing the diamonds?
Just saying that I picked up the idea of combining numbers from the Indians, and over the last 25 or 30 years, I've made my own Western thing, which it can only be. So when I've played my, it showed my ideas of the rhythm diamonds, etc., to really good Indian musicians. They've really enjoyed it, but they say this is definitely a Western logic. It's really, really different from the Indian thing, but it's a really good meeting point. And but anyway, so I'm glad that you've really got into Hindustani music, and I didn't realize that. But I also wanted to ask you too that when you mentioned Chris Daddy Dave, I noticed, like yourself, he uses a lot of different textures and sounds and timbres, if you like, on the kit, and I love doing that as well. And I'm just wondering, when you talked about how to, all the different sample sounds that great DJs used, is that how you ended up bringing those different elements onto your drum kit, in it like a physical term, like bells and
absolutely. It was just purely like, this is a drum kit, but all the sounds sound too much like a drum kit, and I wanted it to sound like a drum machine. So like and that was just the most logical thing to do. And I definitely would have seen it somewhere before, but I don't feel like when I was putting the things on there, I was like going, oh, this is what this drummer does, I'm going to do this. It was more like, oh man, this doesn't sound like the way I want it to sound. Happens if I put this on there and that on there. And then, like you put one thing on one drum and you've never done it before, it opens up your world. And then all of a sudden you just start putting things everywhere. And in the very beginning, like we had a lot of content that changed a lot with Hiatus, and we're doing these live shows. And I remember the first couple of live shows, I didn't even know how to set up a drum kit properly, because there was always a drum kit in the house I was living, so I never had to set up one. I just practiced on that kit, and then we're doing these, these shows, and I'm like, fuck, how do you put on a hi-hat clutch? Like, how do you set up hi-hats? I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Get the sound guy to help me out, and but yeah, those early days of Hiatus, there was so much content that moved around. You couldn't just do it on the one kit, and I didn't have like the experience or the tools and the gear that I have now. Like I've got different things that allow me to kind of, put electronics on my kit, like triggers and all that stuff. You can do that now, and that but there's I think at the moment I'm trying to do the combination of both, because I went pretty far down the electronic side after going down the organic side. Then once I found the electronic side with drums, I just boycotted the organic side, and now I'm trying to come back to both. And it's like, what tones are organic and what sound are synthetic, because I think some of the synthetic sounds that I'm getting on the kit these days, I have to deaden all the drums so they don't sound natural anymore. So it's more specific about what drums you are deadening and what drums you're leaving open. So yeah, just going down that path is pretty interesting, because it's like, to avoid having a massive kit, with all the different tones, there's always like little tricks you can do they can make that, I think a lot of drummers are doing it now. I think a lot of people get that about acoustic instruments in general, like prepared pianos, prepared guitars, prepared drums, same vibe. Yeah.
So it just reminded me of the great Sydney drummer Simon Barker, and how he's had a fantastic liaison, let's say, or love of Korean music, and a lot of the time he places gongs on his drums, and it just sounds so fantastic.
Oh, it sounds amazing. And I think, you did that. You did it a lot. I think last time we played together, you were doing stuff too.
Yeah. And the drums are literally good platforms for placing other things.
Putting other drums
on. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, drumming is a very physical thing, as we know. And you mentioned at an early age you're into sport, which I was as well. And I've always had an athletic approach, let's say, to drumming, in the sense of warming up and stretching and doing exercise. I'm just wondering how do you feel at all that you bring that sort of thing into it? Do you, for example, do you have any routines where you warm up and stretch and all of that sort of thing, or do you just drink a whiskey and that's it?
Yeah, sometimes it depends how I'm feeling on the day. I feel like on tour I tend to practice a bit more. I have a bit more of a routine because and especially on the bus, when we were touring around in the bus, I had more of a routine because there was a lot of time to kill. So I'd get on the practice pads and stuff like that, and it really helped a lot. Definitely.
Did you use a metronome?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. And I like to use them.
We've just lost you.
About the pulse all the time, and thinking like a metronome, which as a drummer you are the timekeeper, and I always have a really big battle with being the timekeeper and also just wanting to explode and be like not a drum kit anymore, and it's that part's really hard. So it does help to practice with a click and try and do what I was just saying then, kind of come back to the click but go away from the click, and not necessarily in a quantifiable way, just kind of like I used to love actually trying to listen to two songs at the same time or two different clicks, or get distracted, playing with a click, but get distracted by a sound in the room that, just happens. Like someone drops a chair and it goes, and then you're playing a groove and then just try and repeat that phrase that just happened. Or if someone's talking, especially with Nay, Nay's got we were playing something and she reacts with any subtle run, you can kind of hear that and try and work out what that is. But it's like an idea that you didn't come up with. You're just listening and being open to ideas that are coming in from all around you. And for me, it's a good way to break out of what you're used to. It's like if you're sitting at a train crossing and then I don't know how many people have tried to do this. I don't know if you've tried to do this, but try and keep, one hand doing one of the pulses and the other hand doing the other one. And it is you could probably work it out as the number diamond, I'm sure, at some point. But it's really hard. So just trying to split your brain, and it never works. But it's just kind of thinking about that you could do that is something that I've always tried to do. I guess just being open to those things, anything that can kind of inspire me. Especially if you're improvising, that's the best. Just keeping your ears open and to any subtle change, and trying to grab that or add to them.
It reminds me of a few things, for example, rain on a tin roof, maybe just before a big downpour. You've got this fantastic set of rhythms, let's say, a lot of dynamics, and sometimes I'll just actually start tapping out a pulse, and I imagine that whatever rhythm is happening on the roof is the perfect rhythm to go with this pulse. So it's kind of like having that openness. And
absolutely, it is. I think if you kept that same pulse going it does work. Like if your
Yeah,
pulse is slower, then anything else around that would work.
totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do that a lot. I love that, and I love being influenced, by nature. And even I go down the beach with a drum, and I'll sort of consciously look at when the waves are breaking, and I might be playing a beat, and look at a particular part of the wave, and as it crashes, that's like the dynamic, big
That's awesome.
dynamics in the So there's all
I
that
love
sort of thing. Another thing I thought of then too when you're talking was like listening to two sounds is when I was a kid, I used to play in a brass band, and we used to do a lot of parades. But in those parades, like sometimes or quite often, the music itself is not that, inspiring for me, a brass band, whatever. But when you're watching a parade and you're caught between two bands, it might be a pipe band and then a brass band, and you're hearing both. For me, that got really exciting.
Yeah.
It just really opened up. Like, I think, okay, well, that's great. And so when I used to run some things in the early days in a place, the Harbourside Brasserie in Sydney, we used to have these big drum ups, which I directed, but I'd have like literally, say, a Scottish band and segueing, say, into a Pizzo's band, but get them playing like half a song each and find the right key that would match. And I just love those crossovers. And I think that's part of being in this multicultural society we live in. We can bring in so many different influences. And I feel that that's what you're developing and Hiatus is developing. It's like you're creating a new music, just like the Brazilians did with using the native melodies and the African rhythms and the Portuguese language. Now there's this beautiful samba and bossa nova and all of that. But I feel like in this time of the world, that you're creating something that's going to be uniquely from this part of the world.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's been fun trying to embark on this journey, trying to just capture ideas, and they change a lot as we all change as humans. And
Maybe just we'll round it up soon, but I also was interested in the fact that you started off when you were a kid playing Australian versions, let's say, of African music, but then also you got to see the wonderful Pizzo. Do you think the African rhythms and music generally is kept in there as an influence in your music?
Yeah, like a lot more than I realized, I think. I feel like in the last couple of years I've been really trying to like find some new inspiration, and try not to oversaturate a source, but for me, like so much of that is sunk in from when I was younger and didn't even realize, just from my parents listening to West African music and around the house, and a lot of that has seeped in. And I feel like I realized that when I moved to Melbourne, and like when in my spare time, what I wanted to listen to, I think that was the moment when I tried to listen to lots of different music, but then I never felt relaxed. And then I would listen to Uma Sangari, which I haven't heard for like number of years. My parents used to listen to her as well when I was younger, and I just asked my parents like what we're listening to, this stuff, and then I started listening to it in like around 22, 23 again, and I was like, oh, I feel so relaxed, like I feel like
back home,
almost day. And and then I just started listening to it all the time because it was like the thing that made me feel good, like, and I would just walk around the city and just have that on my headphones and felt great. So naturally, like, all that eventually seeps into my playing, and even the sounds that I try to create, because I what I really love about certain records, regardless of where they're from, is I like things to be buried a bit, so it leaves more up to the imagination, more up for the listener to kind of be inspired by or taken to a different place. I feel like there's a bit of grain and a bit of edginess, and not everything is quite forward, and it allows more for you you can travel further with that. I find I can travel further with that, and yeah, just imagine more. I guess for lack of better words, yeah. Just it's a nice place to be in.
And maybe just to finish up, do you have a sort of a vision for where your playing will be, say, or let's say your music will be in, say, 5 years' time? Was that too tricky a question?
No, I think at this moment in my life, I'm realizing that I need to start incorporating everything I've learned and put it all in the one thing together. Because I feel like what I do is I box things up, categorize them, and say this is for this thing and this is for that. I never have really ever put everything that I do into one project, which is cool, but it's also like really stifled my my flow sometimes because I don't allow things to connect. From like an ambient thing that I've made to like a really heavy rock thing or all that stuff, or utilizing samples. If I use a lot of samples, I would just stick to samples. Whereas I used to kind of, there was one project where I mixed samples with live playing, and I think since I've gone really down the live playing side and trying to get the sounds that I love on records myself, I've forgotten about the simplicity of sampling and the freedom of that, what that can bring. So I feel like these days, I think I've learned enough in myself at this point to like kind of go back to where I first started, with DJing as well and scratching and bringing in turntables, plus drum kit, plus electronics, and plus like everything, and just combine it all rather than trying to, because I think it's just always this learning. Every record I make is just another lesson for me. So no, I didn't necessarily feel like I have to always release everything, but so like for me in 5 years, I think it's just going to be continually trying to like develop my own sound, and that's basically it. But I feel like big focus on trying to incorporate everything I've learned so far and put it all into the one basket, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, well that's a good thing to wind up on, and thanks for your time, Perrin.
Thanks for your time too. Yeah.
And your time signatures. Your odd times.